Key theme we've been focusing on with options profits and market taker students is the concept of implied volatility and the value of an actual option contract. So Dan, let's take a look at something like Apple that's actually going to report after the close on Tuesday, July 24th. Instead of playing it from a vertical perspective, like a call or put spread on the direction of the price, how could we potentially play this if we want to look at implied volatility, and how would you judge if it's cheap or expensive?
Certainly. One of the great things about options is we can trade just the volatility. We can take a non-directionally biased stance.
Right.
So one way you can do that is to buy a straddle. Now, buying a straddle right before earnings can be really tricky because sometimes the implied volatility level can get really elevated.
Right.
That means the options are at their most expensive point.
So then if you think that it's elevated and you expect it to come down, would you sell a straddle going into a volatility type of event, or do you think it's easier buying going into it because it tends to be a little bit cheaper right before they report?
Well, on the one hand, it's somewhat safer because you have limited risk when you buy a straddle,
right,
whereas when you sell a straddle, you can have unlimited risk. So what you really need to do is you need to match up your expectations for the future volatility of Apple versus the implied volatility level where the options are traded. And that's how you make your decision. Should I be buying or should I be selling the options here?
Now, what about the concept of time decay going into these? Because with Apple, we're looking at expiration, which is today, July 20th. And then our earnings are July 24th. So if you're going to play that, you'd buy the weekly on it, not the actual August contract.
Right.
Is that correct? Now, what's the effect of time on that? Do you, is time decay more prevalent doing a straddle versus a spread, or that doesn't even matter?
Typically time decay is a big issue, especially in those weeklies. They have the highest thetas. But going into earnings like this, you're not going to see the time decay because as each day passes, the theta comes out of it, but the implied volatility tends to rise up enough to make up for that theta. Right. So it's kind of like they don't decay at all.
And finally, to wrap up, what do you prefer to play? The actual direction of the underlying, or do you like to play IV better?
I always like to play both. When I take a directional stance, I always look at the IV to see if those options are cheap or expensive, and that helps me construct exactly which strategy I should be using.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Jill.